There's this moment when you sit down to map out your week and everything feels like it needs to move at the same time. Your body, your money, your relationships, all asking for attention, all sitting on the same list. You're not scattered, you're doing what you've always done, trying to move every part of your life forward because none of it feels optional. But underneath that, there's a quiet strain, the sense that no matter how much you organize or plan, something will always fall behind. And that's the point most people never realize is showing them the real pattern. When you're working hard to shift your life, it's easy to look across your body, your money, your relationships, and feel like all of them need attention right now. There's a pull in multiple directions, and it feels responsible to keep all of them moving at once. Most people live this way for years without noticing the internal strain it creates. They're doing their best. They're not avoiding anything. They're trying to be thorough. But underneath that effort is a pattern that doesn't get named often. It's the pattern of dividing your energy across several domains instead of letting one become the training ground that upgrades everything else. You might notice it when you're planning your week. You write out the workouts you want to do. You write out the work projects. You think about the conversations you want to repair in your relationship. You map it all out with good intentions. By the middle of the week, one area pulls ahead, another falls behind. You adjust, you compensate, and before you know it, you're juggling again. This moment matters. It's the moment where the nervous system shows you its limit. The state being reinforced here is strain, a constant stretch across multiple directions without enough depth in any one of them. And the surprising thing is, this pattern isn't about capability. It's about where the inner state has been trained to focus or not focus. When you spread attention across 3 domains, the emotional state being reinforced is fragmentation. It becomes the default way of moving through your life, even when you want something different. Most capable people don't notice how much they live in this pattern because it's subtle. It doesn't feel chaotic. It doesn't feel like failure. It just feels familiar. Someone I worked with once described it like this: every time she chose to focus on her career, she would feel the pull of her relationship. Every time she focused on her relationship, she felt guilty about her body and health. Every time she focused on her health, she felt pressure to stabilize her finances. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She was trying to grow all 3 areas at the same time. But her nervous system could never settle into depth. She never stayed in one domain long enough to train a different emotional intensity. So each area grew a little, but none of them transformed. You may recognize a version of this. You start a new workout plan, you feel a sense of momentum, and 2 days in, money becomes the priority. A meeting runs long, a financial deadline shifts your focus, the workout slips. Or you start building your relationship with more intention. A meaningful conversation goes well. There's a sense of openness. And then work gets heavy. Deadlines expand. You shift your energy again. The surface story is that life is busy, but the internal pattern is that the nervous system hasn't learned to stay with one domain long enough to create a deep shift. The state being reinforced here is inconsistency, not because you're unreliable, but because the emotional pattern underneath your choices is being divided before it can stabilize. There's a moment that often gets overlooked. It's the moment where you pick one domain and the system immediately pushes you toward another. Not because the other domain is more urgent, but because settling into one place feels unfamiliar. You may notice this when you decide, this month I'm focusing on my body, and within days, another part of life feels louder. Suddenly you feel pressure around money, or a relationship conversation pops up, or you worry that focusing here means ignoring somewhere else. This isn't about priorities, it's a reflection of how your emotional patterns were trained. Someone I worked with said that every time he committed to shifting his finances, he started feeling restless in his relationship. He wasn't avoiding anything. His nervous system wasn't used to long term focus in one space, so it took any signal from another domain as something urgent. The state being reinforced here is restlessness, an inability to stay with one process long enough for mastery to form. But here's the interesting part. When someone finally stays with one domain, truly stays, it begins to reorganize everything else. They train steadiness in one place, and that steadiness carries with them into their career, their relationship, their health. Not because they're trying harder, but because the inner state has changed. Focusing on one domain forces the pattern to evolve. And once the pattern evolves, the nervous system brings that evolution into everything. The idea that focusing on one space shifts the others isn't motivational. It's mechanical. It's how the nervous system works. When you stay with one domain, you repeat one emotional pattern enough times that the pattern becomes familiar and eventually becomes the default. You train steadiness, you train commitment, you train follow through. And those internal patterns don't stay in that domain, they show up everywhere. Someone once worked on his body for 3 months, not obsessively, just consistent, aligned training. And without ever doing money work, he started making better financial decisions. Without doing relationship work, he showed up more grounded. He didn't try to fix any of that. His pattern shifted because the inner state shifted. You may have seen this in your own life at some point. When you get steady in one area, you suddenly feel clear in another. Or when you slow down enough to handle your health, you start seeing your work differently. Or when you get intentional about your relationship, your career starts to move. This isn't coincidence. The state being reinforced here is alignment. And alignment in one place has a way of spreading. This is why people who try to upgrade everything at once end up reinforcing the opposite. They reinforce strain. They reinforce urgency. They reinforce the sense that nothing can fully land. But when they choose one domain and commit to it, depth forms, and depth creates a new pattern that reshapes everything else. A lot of people try to choose the domain that feels easiest, but the place that grows you most is usually the place with the most resistance. Not emotional resistance, pattern level resistance. Someone once told me that work was the easiest place to focus. They could work all day. It felt familiar. But when they focused on their relationship, they felt unsteady. They wanted to retreat. They wanted to move back to something productive. That didn't mean the relationship was the problem. It meant the nervous system wasn't practiced at intimacy, patience, or emotional steadiness. Working in that domain wasn't just about the relationship. It was the place that would evolve the internal patterns running everything else. You may feel this in your own life. There's usually one domain that feels like it demands more from your inner state than the others. For some, it's finances. They feel pressure, scarcity, or avoidance. That domain becomes the training ground for clarity, groundedness, and follow through. For others, it's body and health. They notice inconsistency, self-neglect, or hesitation. That domain becomes the training ground for commitment and steadiness. For others, it's relationship. They feel defended or distant without wanting to be. That domain becomes the training ground for connection and presence. The domain you choose isn't the important part. The inner state you practice inside that domain is. The state being reinforced is what determines your trajectory. If this is landing, you're welcome to subscribe. I share new videos each week focused on training a steady, grounded inner state. Let's keep going. One of the clearest signals that it's time to choose a single domain is this. Your progress feels thin across all areas. Not absent, just thin. You're moving forward, but not changing. You're staying afloat, but not transforming. You're improving, but not shifting the underlying pattern. You may notice this when you look at your calendar and realize you touched every part of your life, but didn't go deep in any of them. Or when you feel proud of how much you handled, but not satisfied with how much has actually changed. Or when you know your intentions are good, but the results aren't matching the effort. That gap shows you the emotional state that's driving the pattern. The state being reinforced is maintenance. You maintain every domain, but you don't transform any of them. Choosing one domain isn't about ignoring the others. It's about giving your nervous system enough repetition to learn a new way of being. And once that's trained, it becomes available everywhere. You can usually feel the difference between divided effort and focused depth. Divided effort feels like always catching up. You're doing a lot, but something always feels slightly behind. The system feels stretched, not in panic, just stretched. Focused depth feels quieter. There's more room. You're not trying to hold everything at once. You're settling into a rhythm that your system can actually absorb. Someone I worked with described it this way. When she focused on her health, she felt a new rhythm inside her day. Things got slower, but clearer. And the clarity she trained physically started showing up in her money decisions, then in her relationships. She didn't intend to fix those areas, but she simply trained a different state in one place, and her system carried it with her. The state being reinforced here is capacity. Capacity to stay, capacity to follow through, capacity to be present, and capacity is transferable. If you're noticing yourself in this, there's nothing wrong. This is simply a pattern that was practiced, and patterns can be retrained. When you pick one domain and truly stay with it, there's a moment where the old pattern tries to pull you back. It'll tell you another area needs attention. It'll feel urgent, rational, practical. This is where the training actually begins. You're not ignoring anything. You're retraining where attention lives. You're training your nervous system how to stay with a process long enough for depth to form. Someone once told me that when he's stuck with his financial training, his mind kept drifting back to health. Not because health was falling apart, but because the familiar pattern wanted to move. He learned to notice the shift, redirect back, and stay with the process he had committed to. Within weeks, his emotional state around money changed, and that change lifted everything else. You may see this in small ways. When you stick with your body training and suddenly find yourself calmer at work, or when you stay with your career training and feel more grounded in your relationship, or when you stay with your relationship training and feel steadier in your body. This isn't about willpower. It's about inner consistency, repetition, alignment. Training one domain deeply enough that the nervous system reshapes itself. The state being reinforced here is steadiness, and steadiness is what transforms the whole system. And so before we end, take a moment with this. No need to analyze it. Just notice what comes up. What emotional state are you practicing most often without realizing it? You'll find the Inner Foundation method below. It's the next step if you want to train a steady inner state you can rely on across the parts of your life that matter most. And if you want to stay connected through ongoing reflection, you'll see the sign up for my weekly newsletter below. I'm also on Instagram at MikeWongCoaching if simple day-to-day reminders are helpful. What we explored today shows up in many ways people rarely name, but it shapes a surprising amount of how life feels. Once you see it, you start relating to your own effort differently. It gives you a clearer sense of what's actually happening inside the day. Glad you were here. I'll see you in the next one.